And then hopefully she can jump in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. My name is Deb Fillman. I'm your host today. I do have two guests today. I have with me Lisa Logan, and Anne is joining us. Let's see if we get sound. Anne, can you hear us? Nope. Okay, well, she's working on it, but let me get started. Thank you all for coming. If this is your first time to the channel, please consider subscribing so you can be notified every time I make a new video or have one of these shows. I do bring you content about what's going on in education in America today. The good, the bad, the ugly. Actually, it's mostly the bad and the ugly. But when it comes to the good, it's usually about what you can do to get your kids a better education than you're going to find these days in most schools. But we're here today to talk about things going on with your kids as far as something called SEL. I've talked about SEL a lot on this channel. So I've already told you what my issues are with SEL. You can go back and look at the playlist about that, and I'm sure I'll be talking about it more ongoing. But today, we're going to talk to you about what we call SEL's evil twin. This would be the questionnaires and surveys that are getting done in your kids' classrooms, either by the teacher evaluating your child or your child self-reporting. And we're going to show you what they look like. We're going to show you what kind of companies put them out. We're going to show you, can you hear me, Anne? I can't hear you. All right. I don't know what to do. It's something to do with the mic. You tell me in the chat. Tell me in the chat. Okay. So we want to show you what they look like. And while we are going to show you companies that produce these, they go by many different brand names. So I don't want to confuse you by showing that. And I'm gonna drop you out while we're doing this, and then when you're ready. Okay. So we're gonna talk about these surveys. We're gonna show you what they look like. And Lisa's going to cover Panorama Ed, and Anne, we hope, is going to be covering something called DESSA, which is by Devereaux. But again, all of these can roll up under other brand names. So I don't want you to get hung up on the brand names. I want you to think more about what these things are doing, what they're asking about your children and of your children and of the teachers, by the way, and whether you think it's appropriate. Before we dive into it, though, a couple of little housekeeping things. Again, please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to the channel. Please like and share this video so we can get as many people watching as possible, if not live, where they can ask questions. And by the way, you can ask questions. But on the replay, we want to make sure parents see this. Very, very important. So the other thing I want to open with before I get to the show and tell is some questions I want you to have in your mind as you're listening to the guests. First thing is, what do you expect from your child's school? What do you think is the proper role of the school and of the teachers? What do you expect them to do all day? And how do you expect them to interact with your child? I don't just mean what kind of personality style or even what subjects they're going to cover, but where do you draw the line between what is teaching and what is parenting? Where do you draw the line between what is caring and supportive of your individual child and what's a bit intrusive and crossing the line into prying and, violating their personal space, their personal mental space, emotional space, and possibly yours as well? So think about in your mind, like, what am I comfortable with the teacher dissecting about my child's psychology, personality, and mental health, and then documenting for the government to store in a little file, electronic file, of course, for a day, a week, a month, or 75 years. Because we're going to tell you how that's how long they do keep it after your child disengages from their purview. So as you're thinking about these questions, let me quickly run through some links to just highlight the fact that what they're going to show you is by no means without controversy. Okay. This is really, really important, that you may be told this stuff is awesome, and we're going to predict whether your kids can have mental health problems. We're going to prevent mental health problems. It's so great. We're so pleased to announce we're doing this. And you may think it's always been loved and approved of. But let's go back to, for example, 2017. Here's a headline. New Hampshire teacher warns parents about psychological evaluations on their children without their knowledge or consent. Okay. There's a whole article. I'll put the links in the description box when we're done. Here's another one, the National Pulse. This one dates 2017. Mental health assessments or standardized testing? Lines are blurring. We'll talk about that. Here's another one. New York City is asking teachers to screen their students' social emotional health. Many feel ill-equipped to do so. And that's 2021. So there are, and I imagine there were many links we didn't find in between. If we found 2017, it's probably some before. It's probably many since. I didn't do an this is Anne found this stuff. I certainly didn't do an exhaustive search. So the teachers are like, if I were a teacher still, I'd be saying the same. Okay. Here's another one. Parent leaders demand halt to DESSA, which you're going to learn about from Anne. DOE's social emotional screener amid privacy, security, and transparency concerns. So parents were like, hold the phone. What's going on? And then this one is an excellent piece. It's an opinion piece. DOE's social emotional screeners give unreliable results that confuse rather than aid students. Now, one thing I do want to call to your attention about this specific article, and again, I promise I'll put all the links in the description box when we're done, so you can go back and find them and read them at your leisure. But this one makes it clear that these assessments were done on the students who were teenagers. This is high school, this one. They go all the way down to 18 months, but this one is high school. And they released the scores to the students. They handed them, here's your SEL scores. And the kids are like, what? What? I'm what? So that would cause some confusion. And they'd say, you know, this PDF version of the DESSA assessment is not the same as what the DOA used, but a number of the questions were used, of this version given to these teachers, etc. And then it says, since the vast majority of high school students have multiple teachers as opposed to one or two main teachers in elementary school, a given teacher would usually spend less than an hour a day with a given student. Yes, they gave them only the third band classes, like whatever your third period class is, whoever that teacher is, that's who was doing it. So you think maybe these are reliable? So whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, secondary issue, is it even reliable data that you're getting? And then we come to, this is an article, and we're going to talk towards the end and in future shows about AI, and the intersections between AI and education. Adrian and a few other people that I heard tomorrow are going to talk about that as well. But think about, why would they want so much data about my child, the personality, their mental health? Are they really trying to help my child? Think about that as we talk. And here's some more. New York City teachers given 4 hours during the school day to complete DESSA screeners. 4 hours. When are they teaching the other stuff? Here's a blog about the Independent Community of Educators Caucus of the United Federation of Teachers. They had to reach an agreement to even do the SEL screeners. So the teachers weren't even on board. The teachers were like, what? This is not what I know how to do. And here's another one, unanswered questions about DESSA, the social emotional screener, and what parents should do. So that kind of takes you through just some headlines to clue you in that what we're about to show you is we're not these contrarian naysayers all alone in the wilderness saying this awesome thing called SEL screening and is bad, and we're all alone in this. We're in really good company saying this. We're just trying to bubble it up and show you examples of what's going on perhaps without your knowledge and explain to you why we think it's a problem. So I hope Anne is coming back. In the meantime, let me introduce Lisa Logan. But actually, I'm going to let Lisa introduce herself for the most part because she's going to be able to do a better job than I am. Lisa, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Deb. I'm excited to educate your audience about social emotional learning. I am a mom of 3. I'm an actual credentialed secondary education teacher in physical education and dance. I serve on the board of a local charter school. And really how I got involved with this was I started looking into the social emotional learning programs being taught in our district. And we actually were able to go into the district office, raise a bunch of alarm bells, and they actually ended up voting out our social emotional learning curricula in our district. I think I'm one of the only ones. So that's what makes me qualified to talk about this. And you're right, social emotional learning assessments are SEL's evil twin. And do you want me to share my screen then? Is that okay for me to do that?
Absolutely. Let's see if we get in. Anne, are you there?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just need to put it on your earbud, your AirPods.
No, I'm full on phone gangster style right now.
Oh, okay. So can you mute yourself while we're talking? Because we hear echo. Thanks. Okay. Lisa, go ahead. You want to share your screen?
Yes. Do I just go into settings and then share?
You can just do share at the bottom. Do you see it?
Don't see share at the bottom. Stop cam. Oh, there it is. I see it. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Slides. Or should I just say share screen? Okay. I will share screen. Okay. I'm getting there.
If you want to send me the presentation too, I can share it from here if you'd rather.
Okay, I'm just going to do entire screen and then go into my here. Can you see my screen there, Deb?
No, are you sharing through StreamYard?
I thought so.
Are you in Chrome?
Oh, allow, hold on. No,
there we go.
Okay.
Okay, well, I now see, yeah, so go to the thing you want because I see your screen.
Okay, do you see my slide?
There we go. Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to your audience about Panorama Education, and it's one of the most widely used SEL assessment platforms in the nation. As you see here, it reaches over 5 million students in 7,000 schools in 40 states nationwide. And 40 states is a lot. It's actually come into my state of Utah. And a lot of times districts will just adopt this assessment screener kind of on their own. But in my state, it came in through a thing called early intervention program. So law was passed. They decided they were going to use a platform. Panorama was the one that qualified for this. And a lot of times with these early intervention programs, they measure things called ABCs, which are not bad. Academics, behavior, which is like how many office referrals they might have, in course performance and grades. And those are all really great things to measure their objective. They have clear measurable thresholds. And if these scores drop in these areas, they can see when they need to intervene if a student's going to not graduate and provide them the help that they need. The same cannot be said about social emotional learning data. It's subjective. We're measuring her thoughts and emotions and feelings, which are hard to measure and quantify. There are no clear thresholds, and now we know it's a whole nother discussion for another podcast, but the standard bearers for SEL have gone woke, and so all the standards now are woke. And you may have heard about Panorama. It was in the news last year for many reasons. So Attorney General Merrick Garland came out saying parents were domestic terrorists before speaking out at board meetings about their students being exposed to racial and gender questions like the ones asked in Panorama. What was found out was that his son-in-law was one of the co-founders of Panorama Education. No conflict of interest there, right? And a lot of times these survey questions cannot be seen. They're copyrighted. So parents will say that I went into the district to go look at them and they're just shown sample questions. But Erica Sanzi, a parent, was covered in the news for putting out 2 survey questions that came allegedly from Panorama. And you see here in one of the images there, it appears to show a survey asking whether the respondent is gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, aromantic, asexual, or questioning. And then that second screenshot is a question simply asking the respondent's gender, but then they add the following options: male, female, transgender male, transgender female, genderqueer or gender fluid, questioning, my identity is not listed, and prefer not to answer. And this is introducing students to the very debatable topic of gender theory or queer theory. which is that they believe that gender and sexuality is a social construct, basically something that's made up in society, used to exploit a certain type of person. And really, in this case, it's someone who doesn't identify as the norm in society. Here in this Panorama survey on diversity and inclusion, students are asked how often they spend time with people at school who are a different race, ethnicity, or culture than them. And you have to start asking yourself, will this count against their social emotional learning score if they don't? And this survey on cultural awareness and action asks this slew of questions about how much they think and talk about race, including how often do students at your school have important conversations about race, even when they might be uncomfortable? And how well does your school help students speak out against racism? Now, do I believe that racism should be talked about if there's an incident at school or in the community? Of course I do. What they mean when they ask the question, how often do students at your school have important conversations about race, even when they might be uncomfortable, what they're actually referring to is talks about critical race theory tenets or concepts. And I'm sure your audience knows because you have them well informed, but critical race theory is a Marxist ideology that asserts that race is a social construct against something that's made up in society to specifically oppress people of color. Deb, my battery's running low and my battery is upstairs. Do you mind if I go grab that real quick? I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. Go right ahead. I'll fill in here. I was going to wait till she was done to mention something about what she just said with regard to the slide prior with the questions. There are a lot of words in there that I have a problem with. You know, important conversations about race. Well, who gets to decide what's important, right? And then, as she just pointed out, about race has become loaded. You know, she just said, you know, they mean the tenets of critical race theory. It's very clear in the tenets of anti-racism, even if they will not admit they're teaching within the framework of critical race theory, because they're not literally teaching you the ideas of Derek Bell. They're teaching within that mindset, which really the same thing as what they openly call anti-racist teaching methodology. Anti-racist teaching methodology is that there is no such thing as not racist. You can only be anti-racist, which means you're actively fighting it. That's why a questionnaire that says, how active are you in talking about race or engaging with the whole topic of racism, is putting forward a value set. It's not saying, you know, that there's nothing neutral at all. They are not evaluating your child as an individual. They're evaluating how well your child conforms to their ideology already, or how much remediation they're going to need until they do. And so, you know, but we'll call it SEL. We'll call it social and emotional learning. It's just social, getting along with us, emotional, having the right feelings about what we care about, learning to agree with us. That's right. Basically what it is. So I guess she had to go straighten out her battery. But Anne, did you have anything to add to that about what we've seen so far?
You can tell it's Wednesday, right? that's all I feel right now.
Happy Wednesday.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's Mercury in retrograde or something.
I like that. I'm like, oh my goodness, can more things go wrong in a podcast? But see, that's what you get. We're just moms trying to like educate folks on this stuff, right? So I'm going to share my screen again. I'll go back.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
That is a really good point that Lisa just made, because somebody asked me, I don't know if it was a couple weeks ago, they said, you know, sincerely asking, or I'm genuinely asking, is this site organic, or do you have a big backer, or you know, do you have someone funding you and you have a big backer? And I'm like, I wish.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice? No, we're just moms who got fed up with, you know, being lied to, and not just with us being lied to, but with other parents being lied to. And we decided to do something about it. And that's really all it is. It's not any more complicated than that. All right. Do you have the screen of your slides?
I'm ready to go. Am I sharing my screen now?
There you go.
Okay. So I left off here on transformative SEL is critical race theory, and explaining what critical race theory was. So again, it's a Marxist ideology used to say that the whole system is basically set up. All the systems and institutions are set up to oppress people of color. And if you're a white person, because you benefit from that arrangement, right, they believe that you naturally have privilege, supremacy, and power, and that you want to keep that status quo. So when they ask the question to students, are you having uncomfortable and important conversations about race? What they're really saying is they want students to recognize their unconscious implicit bias and deal with their internalized racism, which they are guilty of simply because of the color of their skin. Panorama believes in this ideology as evidenced by their statement released in 2020, which says, "We commit to dismantling systemic racism. We commit to embodying and spreading anti-racist practices." And for most people, again, you hear the word anti-racist and you think, great, it's great to be an anti-racist, because what you probably mean or think about that it means is not racist, which I think all of us would agree is a great thing, right? Nobody wants to be a racist. Really what they mean, and in their eyes, of those who espouse anti-racism, simply being not racist does not require active resistance to and the tearing down of the system, which again they believe is set up to oppress people of color. Being anti-racist does, and they want to use social emotional learning and the assessments attached to them to raise a critical consciousness in students and to get them to be social justice activists toward that cause. So how do they measure if the children are buying into these ideologies and other Marxist theories being pushed into education? Well, they're measuring them through a dashboard that looks something like this. These are the social emotional learning skills Panorama assesses in individual students, on the class or school as a whole, and in curated groups. Panorama quantifies and measures the following about your kids: self-efficacy, grit, self-management, social awareness, sense of belonging, and classroom effort, which also includes emotional regulation, engagement, learning strategies, and social perspective taking. You can listen to Panorama here explain it themselves, see how it kind of works on their back end.
With Panorama, you can start by measuring students' social emotional learning skills and supports with research-backed surveys and assessments. It's easy to customize a survey that meets your district's needs, as you can choose from 22 topics like growth mindset, social awareness, and self-management, or any of the topics that align to the CASTLE framework. The survey will take students about 10 to 15 minutes to complete, and teachers and staff can also rate their students' skills right from within Panorama. Once the data is collected, get immediate insight into student voice, what students are thinking, and how they feel about their skills, habits, and mindsets. See how each score compares to Panorama's national benchmarks. Then dig deeper to explore each topic in more detail, like how it's changed over time, or any gaps between student groups, and how students responded to each question individually. Then, identify individual students' strengths and opportunities for growth by filtering student-level SEL results to create smart groups, which will update as new SEL surveys are run over time, allowing you to add specific students to a group for more targeted intervention and progress monitoring. And best of all, our team is always here to help with professional development, training, and support. That's why Panorama is used by thousands of schools and districts across the country. Get in touch with our team to learn how to start using Panorama today.
Can I make comments? I'm like exploding with things to say.
Okay.
I can't help it. There's so much here that is just setting off all my alarm bells. Okay. First of all, can you go back to the part where it says what they measure before he starts talking, the slide right before that?
Yeah.
I had so many questions. Okay. I want parents to think about something very seriously. There is no objective definition of self-efficacy, grit, social awareness, sense of belonging, or even effort. So the idea that a teacher could decide based on observing, or even that a student would accurately report their own effort, Okay. What does engagement mean? That's going to mean something different depending on who you talk to and what they're doing, what they're working on. All right. And then as far as perspective taking is such an overused term. Very often it can mean just subjugating yourself to others' needs. That is being used a lot. So is the word resilient, by the way. Whenever they tell you we're measuring your child's resilience, be very careful, because today's definition of resilience means how much crap is your kid willing to take from other people before pushing back and fighting back and defending their own boundaries. That is very often, they talk about being racially resilient. It just means how much you're going to sit and take it. So, you know, in the white fragility scale. The other thing I want to point out is, you see how they're just so beepity beep with the little music, and they're like, it's so great. Look at our data. Look at our data. Look at how many ways you can play with the data. Well, I hate to keep referencing this book I'm reading, but I can't help myself. It's that good. It's by Nassim Taleb, and it's called Anti-Fragile. And he talks about the difference between signal and noise. And this is a classic example. Panorama Ed is a classic example of people who've decided that data and forecasting is God, and that more data is better. More data and is more signal, when in fact it's the opposite. More data is more noise. And then they're telling untrained people who are already using subjective measurements to go ahead and play with the noise to make new noise. Where's the signal? So you can, and remember too, they have a political agenda, social justice. So you cannot tell me with a straight face they're not projecting their own interpretation of the noise into the noise to fabricate signal. And then did you see the part about you can create groups? If you don't think they're going to create groups of little individualists who are not quite getting the message, you're not really following along, is my opinion. So I'm sorry, I just had to jump in and say that, because this to me showcases everything wrong with this in just one little presentation that I'm sure everybody thinks is so great. They're like, this is wonderful. Look at all the things we can do. And I look at it and say, look at all the noise they're creating around your child and all the ways they're going to manipulate your child's life and feelings about themselves and the teacher's feelings about them, while calling it science.
Yeah,
it's not.
I've also heard them say in there that Panorama can measure any topic that aligns with CASEL standards. And again, the standard bearers have gone woke. So they're measuring your kid not based on even their own self-reporting, but based on these standard bearers that are saying you have to think and feel a certain way. And also, they say in there that they can identify students, like you were saying, for growth opportunities and targeted interventions. Again, you know, for me, it begs the question, same as you were talking about a second ago, you know, if a child is answering this survey, and they're asked how often they spend time with people at school who are a different race, culture, and ethnicity than them, and they say almost never, right? Does that count against their score in social perspective taking? I mean, that's a real question we should be asking ourselves. And also, what does targeted intervention look like? And I want to just point out here that Panorama's already thought about that. To increase their scores and create growth opportunities for all the social emotional skills that they're measuring, they'll need social emotional learning curricula to teach these kids these social emotional skills and exactly how they should think and behave. They say here on their website that districts and schools using their SEL measurement platform can gain access to age-appropriate lesson plans, interventions, video-guided practices, and interactive activities from leading curriculum providers who specialize in student and adult SEL. And I'm also going to show you what that looks like in a little video here.
Students and teachers need to know that their voices are changing mindsets and impacting practices. That's why we created Playbook, an online professional learning library of research-backed and evidence-based SEL interventions for kindergarten through high school. Right inside Playbook, educators can find hundreds of strategies from dozens of leading SEL curriculum providers, like Second Step, Conscious Discipline, Character Strong, and Move This World. On everything from supporting students' social-emotional growth to building adult capacity for SEL. Every strategy on Playbook maps directly to a topic on Panorama's surveys, so educators can move directly from reviewing Panorama data into taking action, filter interventions by grade level, curriculum provider, and topic, access videos, online courses, or download handouts and guides to use in the classroom, and create a personal library of bookmark strategies. Playbook is the best way to embed data-driven social-emotional learning strategies into the fabric of your school community.
So much to say about that, Deb. You know, obviously on my YouTube channel, I go into extreme detail on CASEL, the standard bearer, and the problems with what they're doing now with transformative SEL. And also, I have a whole video dedicated to Second Step and all the political ideologies that are surfacing within that alarmed our community. So one thing to note about that, and Second Step is actually one of the most widely used programs in the nation. So I'm sure many of your viewers have it. Most curricula your school district adopts goes through a very rigorous multi-step process before they even adopt it. And it includes scrutiny by stakeholders, including both your local school board and patrons of the district. And I'm curious to know if any of these lessons offered on the back end of Panorama here have gone through that scrutiny and that process, or if they're just kind of slipping it in under the parents' nose, and we don't know what's in these lessons. And another thing to note is that social emotional curricula and the surveys often ask students to share very sensitive information and about topics that are usually addressed in therapeutic settings. When children who have experienced trauma or in therapy are asked questions about their emotions or sensitive topics, it can actually have detrimental consequences. And there are often no warnings given to parents that these surveys may ask the type of questions that can trigger students like that and have a reaction in their children. Teachers are not qualified also to address the needs of a student experiencing anxiety or a depressive episode or a panic attack as a result of taking a test, which brings up these sensitive and emotional feelings as a result of the questions that are asked of them. And it really puts teachers and students in a vulnerable position and asks teachers to practice psychology without a license. It's very important to acknowledge that. In fact, a principal at a Utah school told me that a parent had called him upset after their student had come home and had been asked in one of these SEL surveys, what is the hardest thing you've ever been through? And it was a Panorama screener, and the kid was having a complete episode of anxiety. I want to say that Dr. Laura Sanger is one of the few professionals in her field actually kind of ringing the alarm bells about this and speaking out about it, and imploring her colleagues to do the same. And I encourage you to watch this video on her Rumble channel if you haven't already. Another really huge problem with Panorama and the woke castle standards and that dictate what's measured through them and taught through the SEL curricula is that tech giants like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg are behind all of these efforts. In fact, the main funders of CASEL and Panorama is the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. And Zuckerberg has been in trouble in the past for misusing sensitive data for nefarious purposes. You may remember that Facebook and Cambridge Analytica were exposed for their controversial partnership during both the 2012 and 2016 elections because basically they did stuff to determine the psychological makeup of their voters. And using that data, the company assigned a score to each voter and then targeted and tailored ads accordingly to them to influence their vote in the upcoming election. And it makes you wonder, what are they using the psychological data for they're collecting through these SEL assessments to target our kids with? And honestly, the biggest concern for me, Deb, is, and I think for probably everyone here, is that the sensitive information they're collecting through assessments like these are not protected by the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA. There is a growing concern that these scores, which follow students throughout their academic career and beyond, basically they say preschool through age 20 through these statewide longitudinal data systems, that they'll be using that information in the future as part of a future social credit system. Companies are already talking about hiring to boost, their environmental, social, and corporate governance scores based on this emotional intelligence and how inclusive their workforce is. And it really begs the question, will students not be able to get into college or get a job or get a loan if they don't align their thinking with the government's in issues like gender, sexuality, the environment, etc.? And so, while I don't mean to scare your audience, I just want to educate them that it's imperative to protect your students' values, attitudes, and beliefs, any data collected about that, from being subjectively measured and scored, and that they need to highly consider opting out of all SEL assessments and curricula.
Very good. Well, Lisa, that was fantastic, very informative and thorough, and thank you so, so much. So hopefully you guys have a better understanding now of what is going on. As far as here's Lisa's info. You can follow her on Twitter. I am Lisa Logan. On Instagram, Ms. Lisa Logan, YouTube, and Facebook, UtahParentsUnited.org. So this is why we call it SEL's evil twin, because you'll hear about SEL and they say these skills, they're so important and we're doing this, but you may have wondered, well how? Like, what does that even look like? Well, we've talked before about the curricula. Anne and I have talked about Second Step. We've shown you things from Second Step, but now you understand what they're doing diagnostically to decide that your child needs more of it. And hopefully the alarm bells are going off and you'll opt your children out. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who's going to talk to us about Panorama's evil twin or competition or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if they're used together or if it's like one or the other, but basically DESSA, right, from Devereaux is the other. So Anne, take it away. Tell me what I should bring up or show, or what do you want me to do?
Let's start with Aperture, and then we'll get into, because that's what people are going to find is if you can find your contracts, which under sunshine laws, everybody should be able to, especially if you have a procurement department, they should be public knowledge.
Is that this, or was it something else?
I think it's the one that says IMG 0515.
Okay.
It's the blue one. So this is a local teacher here in Chesterfield County she's going to pull it up.
1 second.
Yep.
1505?
Yeah.
Okay. Where's the number? Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. Here we have it. Okay.
But so this is in high school here.
I didn't need to do that. I'm so sorry.
So
keep talking.
When I first started digging, going into the government contracts and finding all of these web apps like Lexia, Dreambox, or Class Dojo. I mean, everything that you're like, what? Canvas? That's bad. It's literally all of them. Like anything that your kid's playing on, a video game that's a class approved, it's tracking data on them. But the high school, she said, well, we don't do SEL. She's in a high school here. She said, but I did find this. And they get sent everything. It was in one of her boxes. And I said, yes, you do. This is Aperture. And so Aperture would be like Castle, kind of like for SEL. Like, so people are either doing Panorama or Aperture. And the tinfoil hat wearer that people think that I am, but I think that people have blown up Panorama to keep the attention away from this one, because this is the one that goes back like 80, 90 years, the company does. And it's straight up, I mean, it tells you like whether the chances of your child having ADHD behavior, I mean, actual psychologist stuff. But so this would be for 9 to 12. And this one's actually, it says student self-report. So they were self-report on themselves. And it's the same kind of questions that, we talked about just let's see, things like when you're in a room, how honest are you, or with other people, how honest are you, things like that. And I said, but where it got me going was I found the Committee for Children and Second Step contracts here in Chesterfield and all the other ones, but I didn't know what Aperture was. So I started digging around, and then it led me to DESSA. And then I saw DESSA and DESSA Mini. And so I said, okay, well, that's got to be how they're what we always questioned. Well, okay, they get this data, but whose lens of whatever does it get filtered through? And we've all kind of questioned that. And then when I saw this, I was like, well, what is DESSA? And I looked it up. And if you want to pull up, the one that looks like this?
Okay. Let's see if I can get that now.
So starting in kindergarten, now, I don't know if you guys have heard of Head Start, but this government preschool that everybody's like, oh, everybody deserves to go to preschool. Well, yeah, they do. But in a perfect world, it wouldn't be paid for by Fed Ed because they have something called Deca. And they have an 18 to 36 months where they're going to be government preschool assessing your children. But this one is kindergarten through 8th grade. They do with the teacher. Now the teachers, this is what I have to get you to understand, is that they do one called the DESSA Mini, and it's filling in bubbles about. Here
it is. Okay. The DESSA Mini. I got it.
Yeah. So they're filling in bubbles. And some places it starts out the day, and they do it multiple times a day. Yeah. So that's the DESSA Mini. So, I've read studies where they do it 3 to 4 times a month or every day or whenever they want to. There's no consistent, but you can probably see them better than my phone, or I can pull them up. But so that's the DESSA Mini. So that would be kindergarten. And here where I am in Chesterfield, it's through 8th grade. There's no self-reporting until 9th grade here. But
so the teacher, so what you're saying when there's no self-reporting means that the teacher is using the form. And what the form says is this form describes a number of behaviors seen in some children. Read the statements that follow the phrase. During the past 4 weeks, how often did the child? And place a check mark in the box underneath the word that tells how often you saw the behavior. So that's one person in the child's day. Right. Answer each question carefully. There are no right or wrong answers. Well, obviously there are. Otherwise, what is the point of scoring them? Please answer every item. If you wish to change your answer, put an X through and fill in your choice, whatever. They have things like accept responsibility for what he or she did. Well, what if what if you saw something you thought was A and it was actually B, and they're not going to accept responsibility for something they didn't do? Do something nice for somebody. Define nice. Speak about positive things. Again, totally subjective. Pay attention. Contribute to group efforts. What if the group effort was dumb and getting in their way? Perform the steps of a task in order. Whose order? What if the order doesn't make sense? Show care when doing a project or schoolwork. Follow the advice of a trusted adult. How do you know who they trust? Who are you to decide who they trust? And why would you rate whether or not they did it? Kids make mistakes. This is not, I can't even fathom why they would ask these questions. But anyway, so that's what you're talking about. Is goes all the way through 8th grade. The teacher's doing this.
Yes. And then but the Devereaux, the actual DESSA, the full blasted one, that one can start in 2nd grade. I think 1st or 2nd grade, they can start reporting on themselves with the full blown, how often did I, or you, or did I, it varies, but that's the problem, is that there's no consistency. Like there's one of the books I sent you that has a sample like Devereaux plan for the day. And it says start out the day with the DESSA Mini. Like, so there's no consistency about how often. And so the teachers that we see how much hate our unmasked children, we expect people, lobbying groups like the NSBA, the VSBA, whatever your SBA is, to leave that at the door. Is that these are the people that are now doing these psychological evaluations, because that there's nothing. I mean, the questions only get, yeah. So this is the Deca. You can just scroll through it. This is for 18 to 36 month old children, and pre-K. So they have Deca 1 and Deca 2. And it's Head
I mean,
Start.
look at this blows my mind.
Like literally
Upon
this one
enrollment.
right here, it says Head Start on it. So whenever, like right now, our county is getting ready to start Head Start. And everybody's like, God, you're so racist. Why would you hate free preschool? Like the wording of Panorama, I can still see people like on the other side of the fence being like, yeah, people need to be more like that. But that's why I'm like, nobody, I cannot think of any parent that would want this following or think that anybody evaluating their child like that is okay.
Well, what they're doing is they're telling the directors and the administrators how to use this electronic system to document every last little thing about the student. And then this is what the teaching staff has to do within 45 days of entry to the program. First 45 days of an 18 to 36-month-old's entry to a daycare or preschool program is going to be the most stressful, the most traumatic time for them. It is a rare child that goes, bye, Mom, and gets dropped off to preschool at that age without any kind of separation anxiety or any kind of group dynamic anxiety. I mean, you're talking about only the most, I don't know, like agreeable, social, whatever little children are going to be comfortable with that. And they're going to sit down and they're going to evaluate your child within those first 45 days. And it's going to go into this system. And then they put them under the mental health tab. So the second your little 1.5-year-old or 3-year-old or 2-year-old or whatever goes into these programs, they have a mental health file. Not because they had a problem, not because they presented with a symptom, but because somebody took, okay, little child I never met before, let me evaluate you after 45 days of paying attention to you and 45 other people. And now I'm creating a mental health tab in my computer system under your name.
Yeah. And it's broken down to the point where I'm like, what preschool what kind of preschool we don't have that kind of help here. I don't know who does for childcare to take care of a room full of preschool children and do like but not no matter that. But yes, it will follow them forever. I have the Library of Virginia printout that this 75 years. It says it will stay in the system. It's this thick and it breaks it down by different types of data and how many years it can stay in the system. But then the question is that who is auditing that? Who is correcting it? Like who's actually making sure that what they call personally identifiable, because under these statewide longitudinal data systems, your first and last name are not considered personally identifiable, and they don't consider a student ID because nobody's ever defined it, whether it is or is not. It is, because no other child will ever have another one. It is personally unidentifiable. So
but look, it says the teacher data is used to determine if home and school goals are needed. Home goals.
Yeah. So
they're going to like tell you what to do at home.
So everybody gets the tier 1. And that's where you have to remember the children that actually need the tier 2 and tier 2 that are not getting it, that the kids that actually need mental health that are not getting it. So I'm tired of hearing the excuse of how we're missing children. No, you're missing them because you're giving it to everybody. You're missing the ones who are actually like, hey, oh, over here. Yeah. Like whether it's overt or it's not overt, the teacher is so bogged down, filling out more standardized. So the people that fought standardization because it was creating or trauma for historically marginalized, tell me how in the world this is any better. Because this one doesn't mention anything about racism or any of the buzzwords. This one is just straight mental health. That
3 to 5 years.
Yeah, so that would be like the pre-K into kindergarten.
Yeah. And then of course the form, just goes on, and then they get so excited about how their little systems work. Create a new child record. Manage the children. Look at our cool
manage
tech.
18 months old. Tell me how you're going to manage an 18 month.
But they're managing their files is what they're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And then they've got, click to print it. Oh, hold your mouse. This is like a computer training and how to do this whiz bang thing, put the rating date, the period, all this. Meanwhile, most parents don't know this is happening. Never mind know that they have a right to have access to it.
Yes.
They don't even know that.
Nope.
It's just, this is the training. This is what the people who are administering this are going to see, early childhood assessment for preschoolers. Now I'm going to go find that 75 years thing. So talk about something I want to make sure people see that.
So the big thing is, so I have the Aperture contract, and that's the thing, is that you're not looking for DESSA, you're not looking for, but then I said, well, what does DESSA stand for? And it's if you look up Devereaux Center for Resilient Children, you will find all of this. It's just buried in a company, the Devereaux Family Foundation, that's been around literally since like 1918. And that's another show entirely. But so Devereaux and Aperson created Aperture. And so it's just like the speed out, like Committee for Children, and then second step. Like, so look for Aperture. You're not looking for DESSA. But if you want to look it up yourself, it's Devereaux Center for Resilient Children. You look up DESSA Mini, Deca, DECA, like Deca 2. It's right there with Head Start, full preschool. You can find it yourself. But, you know, reading the county contract, it was I think it's one of the first contracts I ever printed, and I didn't even know what I was reading, but I kept reading, like, who is responsible, and it says the county will ask the contractor for permission for access to the data. So they're telling you, and then they tell you, it says it right, because it's in the United States, that where's it housed? In the United States, literally is what this contract says. Well, a cloud, they might be a physical cloud building. There's one like 2 hours from here down in Southwest Virginia, but that's not an actual like cloud where all of this is stored. And so look at like data breaches, and you can find county all over like the nation that have had millions of children, their information. This is the Library of Virginia. And I was like, 5 years, 1 year. And then I was like, did I say 75 years?
Yeah, this is student cumulative file, long-term documentation, post 1935. So if you graduated school before 1935, you're golden. Actually, I'm sorry, they protect it. They They keep it permanently, but it's all like in paper. This is electronically stored for 75 years after you transfer, withdraw, whatever. 75 years after. That's more than your lifetime.
Yeah.
That's going to go into your children and grandchildren's lifetime.
Yeah. So, and it's the big question is why, but pull the one up that made me go, huh? And I sent it to you.
Yeah, I got that.
Huh?
Yeah. Hang on. Let me get that. That one's kind of weird. Maybe you can explain to us what we're seeing. Let me get
that is, it is. So we say, well, what comes out after you put all of this, info into these or whatever, these bubbles that the teachers don't, the good ones are like, I can't believe I've been doing that this whole time. And I'm like, yeah, long before COVID, they were doing this. So whatever they're telling you about the the trauma from COVID, no, this has been going on years and years before COVID. But so I pulled it up and I was like, what is that? And I looked at it and I was like, so what they've given this specific child like a score, and the plus or minus is the T-score is like above what's acceptable or not acceptable. But no matter what the numbers say, is that it's spitting like based on a bubbled Scantron that no matter what, they're under 18, so they're still children. Or you're having a teacher who, one, doesn't like your unmasked child, but they're spitting out. This is straight up. This has no educational value, because that's where it makes me so mad about FERPA and HIPAA and all these things that don't protect these children, is because this will follow them forever. So they go to try to get into college, get a job, whatever their teacher filled out about them that had them having a bad year because their parents got divorced. it's going to say sorry. And that's where EQ and like having that, like, we're going to be in China. If you didn't, like, we're going to be having, nope, I don't care how much money you have. Your EQ is not like, which is insane. That's going to be the determining factor for our lot in life.
Well, and if you think this isn't going to be racialized, you're dreaming.
Oh, absolutely.
It's absolutely going to be racialized, because remember, at the same time, they are giving the kids information about themselves, especially if you're white and you're male and you're heterosexual.
Oh yeah.
The messages that you're getting is you're an oppressor.
You're a terrible
bad.
person.
You
Right.
need to be constantly making amends. Where's the echo?
It's me.
Oh. And you get that message loud and clear. Do you think maybe you're going to start manifesting some of these behaviors?
And
because I'm sorry, somebody tells me I'm crap all day, every day, even if they do it with a smile on their face and tell me they love me and they just want me to be a better person. So what? I'm just going to be perpetually a bad person?
They're asking them, were you nice to somebody today? Like, you're an oppressor. Have you been nice to somebody today? Like, tell me what kind of child that's going to, like, you're going to start like aggression, like but this is the point that I was like, oh my God. That's where, that answered my question. And, this is what they're doing with it.
Next up, what do we got? I've got some other cool.
Yeah. Pull up. I know it. I mean, just, yeah, pull up whatever you want.
Okay. So this is, another weird one that I don't really understand, but maybe you can explain it to me. This thing, Competent Kids, Caring Communities, and the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment.
That's the DESSA.
So they're like rating these kids on all these little skills.
You know, Castle competencies. DESSA has aligned with Castle. They're aligned, and so is Second Step and all these. But so teachers can also go in, and this is what this Pinterest is a fun place. It used to be for this crafty mom, but it's a twisted place now, because you can go in there. You want to talk about Wikipedia for teachers and like Wikipedia for psychiatrists, like. So yeah, so this is a teacher that I think she actually works at Devereaux, has made her own little check boxes using, the pretty little, ABCD problem solving, but they all align, if you look, with what these personal responsibility, optimistic thinking, goal-directed behavior. So even though it sounds okay, they're telling you how Sir Snake's Get Along plan aligns with social awareness. Well, I would like to go read that book now. If Mr. Snake's Get Along plan is aligning with social awareness, like, so it's always, that's the twist, is that this is no longer just a scantron bubble filler, and someone has actually created like a K through K through 5, like book and classroom curriculum that would align with Devereaux.
So they're not even just doing the screenings. They're saying like, hey, let's take all these little competencies and work them into the curriculum.
And there's nobody checking behind them. There's no, because
and I'm sure they're doing great things.
That as long as it aligns, then you know what? Go for it. But yeah, so I mean, anybody, like I said, Devereaux Center for Resilient Children, DESSA Mini, Aperture Ed. It's all out there, and you can have your own, like, stay up for days and be like, huh? Like, what?
Yeah,
tomorrow is my daughter's last day in public school, and I have one that will never set foot in one. And she came home to me and she said, we're allowed to have our cell phones on all day tomorrow. So can you take that thing that you blocked my phone? And I said, no, because I'm your mother and I block it for one reason. Okay. But so I was so glad to have her out of that school, because I can't even fathom. I don't even want to dig anymore, because at this point I'm like, okay, we're moving on. Like, because
I mean, look at this. Look at the relationship skills. A child's consistent performance of socially acceptable actions that promote and maintain positive connections with others. Have we gone back in time to the 1950s? Oops, there's the echo again.
I think it might be me.
Were the teachers judging you on like how white your gloves are or how polite, it's like, you didn't smile when you came in the room. I mean, as I asked you guys at the beginning of this show, I hope you're still thinking about what the appropriate role of school and the teachers is. And I know many people say, well, I send my children to school rather than homeschooling because what about socialization? Well, guess what? This is socialization. And maybe now you might understand my point of view that says, if the school is failing to treat your child as an individual student who needs an education in the fundamental skills of reading, writing, math, scientific inquiry, thinking, using reason, even if your kid didn't speak to anyone the entire day except the teacher when spoken to, when asked a question, or when given directions. If this child didn't speak to another child and was happy and was growing and was learning and came home and said, Mom, I learned all this amazing stuff, or Dad, I want to show you what I learned at school today, but they had zero friends, but they were happy because of all the exciting, cool stuff they were reading and learning, and they just wanted to be left the freak alone. Why is it the teachers or the schools or the principals or the government's job to say, oh, I don't know, you didn't play well with others today. You didn't do this, you do that. This reminds me of when I would go work in corporate America, and I was that person who liked to lunch alone. I really preferred to have my lunch hour by my flipping self. I went to meeting after meeting after meeting after useless, stupid meeting that could have been an email. And I couldn't get my work done. And I needed my lunchtime to just get like my head on straight and think about what I had to do to actually perform my job function. And I preferred that. I wanted to put in my headphones, I wanted to listen to my music or read my book and be left the flip alone. And it came up in my review over and over again.
Deb doesn't play well with others.
You're not a team player. You don't go to the happy hours. You don't go to the lunch outings. And I'm like, am I getting my job done?
Do I do my job?
Thank you. So why should your child be subjected to anything different? Now, obviously, you might hope that they make friends, and maybe they hope they make friends, or maybe you hope they have good relationship skills. But anybody have a kid on the spectrum or two who looks at this list and is thinking, wow, my kid fails, like right out of the gate, just for being herself.
Yeah.
Just for being herself, even though she just wants to read her book and mind her business and eat her lunch alone, she's going to have a failing score in relationship skills. No.
My daughter,
beyond if your kid's on the spectrum, what if they're just an introvert?
My daughter's an introvert.
I'm just saying, like, they always, I brought that up specifically because they're constantly using the term ableist.
Right.
Now, I don't use that term. I hate that term. I don't like any of these little politically correct terms, but they're the ones using it. And then they're turning around and doing this, like, square peg must fit in the little round hole. It's a very small round hole.
My daughter was completely happy and thought it was funny that she has the extroverted mom and extroverted baby sister. And she's we always joked about it until like this year when she went to 6th grade. And all of a sudden, like, having one friend and reading was getting picked on because they allow cell phone time as a reward system. And so I had to get her a cell phone so that she would not get picked on.
They're very contradictory too. Goal-directed behavior. I thought that was white. The Smithsonian told me that was white. Pursuing goals and achieving things, completing tasks of varying difficulty. I'm sorry, that's racist. Yeah. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but they use terms, and then you really have to wonder, well, what do you mean by this one? Because you just in some school districts, you're getting rid of grades. Or, in Portland, they're just getting rid of grades. Or they're doing racialized grading in some places. I just read about that. Where was that in, was it somewhere in California, or I can't remember.
Indiana? Illinois?
It was Illinois. It's Oak Park. It's Oak Park, Illinois. They're doing racialized grades, and an actual quote was, Black and brown children can't be expected to compete. on this with the grading system. And I'm like, do you hear yourselves? And then we have
said
this.
it. We've heard that from teachers here with different standards of conduct for white and black, brown, Latina children, but mainly black and white children. With multiple teachers have told me, teach, and then most of them have left by now, but they're telling, so-and-so will they'll get into a fight, and this kid has never been in a fight, and then you have one who is always in trouble because, you know, they just can't punish that because of equity. They have to make it look like it's working, and so they're penalizing. So
imagine this is your child. Okay, imagine this is your child. Initiative, self-regulation, attachment relationships, total protective factors. Like, you can actually rate a child on whether they have enough resilience to be protected from what? What if I don't want them protected from everything? What if I didn't send them to school to bubble wrap around all their emotions, except I did send them to school expecting you weren't going to stick your finger in their brain every 2 seconds? This is like, we're trying to protect your child by beating them. You know, this is 1984, where you go to the building, you know, the Department of Love to be killed, basically.
The Department of Truth and
Honesty.
Honesty.
What do they call it? Yeah, they call it something like the Love Building or something. Anyway, so they say typical need. Now, apparently, little Colin needs some further instruction in attachment relationships. What do you think instruction in attachment relationships looks like? Wouldn't you want to know as a parent? Wouldn't you want to know if your child rated this way and they said need? Wouldn't your next question be, what the hell are you going to do to my child to teach them, to instruct them how to have relationships and be attached? Because I'd really want to know. Like, I'd want to know every sentence that was going to be.
I don't even think it's so until tier 3 that they have to require parental involvement is and what I've looked. So it's like a 3-tiered like triangle.
Tier 3 is the social worker.
Yeah. But that's is that they say that tier 2, like after that they have been dinged for not being socially, emotionally, whatever enough, that they could move to tier 2. There's no clear anything. So when they talk about research, there's no clear direction or anything. So they could do what is tier 2. Like, there's no alignment. They certainly align with Castle, but there's no alignment on anything else. And this is what, like, when they want to get the parents involved, now they want to know their parents. And so any parent who gets this that isn't alarmed about what they're doing to your children, now they want to put you your info if you would actually send that back.
Yeah.
And I think there was a day, probably, I don't know, maybe when I was 10 or 20, I don't know, that getting a survey, like something home from your school, like, wouldn't send off alarm bells. And that's just how far we've drifted from, like, reality is that, okay, so you want to know, and it wouldn't have, but anybody that sends anything back to their school and is not spending 2 hours a night going, if you're still going to stay in public school, and has not heeded my warning and is not plugged, I will teach classes online how to go through your child's Chromebook.
I want to make this big enough so people can see. So we talked about at the beginning how this stuff is controversial. Okay. Well, these are minutes from a school board meeting in Whitestone, New York, where obviously after lunch for some reason was more important, but after they got done talking about lunch, they got to the DESSA screener as one of their agenda items. Many families are opting out of the screener. Many different reasons, but a lot is based on misinformation. You ever hear that word, you guys? Have you heard the word misinformation? Parents on SLT, I'm not sure what that means, agreed that an explanation provided to them by S. Yakubi and D. Tratner during the meeting was very thorough and helpful. I would love to have been a fly on the wall of that explanation. And some misconceptions were clarified. For example, parents thought students were being pulled out as a data dump and taken out of classroom settings. The parents' biggest concern was they were being pulled out of class to do this. That was their biggest concern.
we're not, because we know that they're pulling out of an actual education setting. So it's like, it's the whole CRT thing.
We're just
like,
doing it inside the room.
Right.
So, yeah. And then they were talking about, it was also suggested to post a video on Dojo, where they collect more of your students' data and record more observational information about your child's behavior every day. In fact, for those teachers diligently using it. And so anyway, but as you can see, like even when parents opt out, they consider this like, we need to address this. Yeah, we need to address the parents opting out. This is a problem.
But here's the big problem is that I found, because this is that I went through board docs because I knew that it had to be in there somewhere. And I found the minutes that I found the presentation that Dr. Thomas Taylor now in Stafford did. And it had maps and it had PALs and this is 2017. It had their strategy on how to implement it throughout the next 5 years. But guess what is not anywhere else and anything else mentioned under maps and PALs is in next year's curriculum under the list of assessments. Guess what's not? Aperture, DESSA. And so I found the one county, believe it or not, that in this whole state that has done this correctly. And it's probably because of the amount of insanity there that they're like, I'm not even going to deal with this, is Fairfax. You can actually pull up, they sent home a letter. Now, it's under COPA. It's COPPA, and it's 13 and under 13 years old. Can you opt your child out? Why? Because they developed it in 1998 and nobody tried to do anything about it until Trump's administration. And they were literally getting ready to change it. And then 2020 happened. But the good news is that they have issued a statement as of last week that they are cracking down on ed tech.
Yeah.
We have to stay on them about that. But you can opt your child out under 13. You can also write and make the school request all of the data on your child. And so on VAFCF, I finally finished the toolkit and but there are things under FERPA and PPRA that you can do to stop this or attempt to, but you still have to stay vigilant. But so Fairfax sent a letter and they sent the thing out with every web app.
Let me see if I can find the letter. I just wanted people to quickly see that they have like a little plan for the school day.
Yeah, but
I know I have that letter.
So what they've done is this is what Obama did, is that they made school officials now includes third-party vendors, contractors, that's a school official. You can find it on the FERPA site. Like literally, if you can look under 2008 and then 2011, like it'll have like amendments or whatever to FERPA. And that's when he also made teachers parents. So whereas it's the FERPA, what used to say requires parental permission. Well, it still says that, but there was an amendment that teachers, because the only way that they could get these surveys done was we couldn't constantly be asking parents because then we know it wouldn't get done. So they made teachers can give parental consent to do this. And under the law of Fed Ed, and but the thing is that we've got the FTC on our side on this one, the Federal Trade Commission, because they regulate COPA, and they're not happy right now. And so, and that's why I'm calling on everybody. I want to get the whole state to get the biggest letter because they've been very receptive and they want for whatever that means. But so, yeah, I have emails out right now asking, can you show me where the DESSA opt-out is? And
it's very important for parents to understand that this stuff is not on the up and up, even within many state regulations as it is. Like you sent me this. This, I believe, is from Virginia, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so like, look at this. No student shall be required to participate in any counseling program to which the student's parents object.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty easy argument to make that this is a counseling program.
Yes.
They may call it instruction. They may say it's for social emotional learning skills, but I'm sorry, when you're talking about things like resilience and you're talking about things like relationship skills and you're talking about, that the kid needs help with attachment or the kid needs help with whatever other things that they're rating, you're talking about therapeutic, what Lisa pointed out, you're talking about therapy. And many of these things are discussed openly in class and, you know, presented in the learning materials in a therapeutic fashion. It's not left to, you know, there's no room for disagreement. And at the same time, so it seems like instruction, or indoctrination rather, but it's around the child's feelings and not knowledge. So
that's the Code of Virginia. That's like the Constitution of Virginia. So that's like that is the actual, it was under, I think because I was doing a dig on social work, because you got me down that path, but it's either the Code of Virginia but it's school social worker or school, but that's actual, and I will put it up. I can't do it right now, but I will make sure we get that. But that's the Code of Virginia, so that might as well be.
I can almost guarantee you every state has something similar.
Oh yeah,
because it says here a provision prohibiting the use of counseling techniques which are beyond the scope of the professional certification or training of counselors, including hypnosis or other psychotherapeutic techniques that are normally employed in medical or clinical settings and focus on mental illness. Understand something, guys. Even your school counselor is not the appropriate person to be doing things like teaching your kids to meditate or telling your kids how to, like, they can recommend breathing exercises, but to actually lead an entire class in breathing exercises, that's therapeutic. Okay. So, you know, the school counselor can sit and listen and can talk and suggest that the child go to therapy, or bring in the parents and suggest that the child do something therapeutic, but they cannot provide the therapy. They are not therapists. Social workers aren't either. And yet we have in our schools, we've got teachers, classroom teachers doing this stuff. Never mind the counselors, never mind the social workers, who, by the way, are also doing it as well.
And you know how they're getting around this as well is by having incentivized programs written in the law to have teachers become social workers, for one. And second, what they're doing is saying that these aren't mental health screeners. We're going to classify these as something else. And so that's how they get around some of those laws in that regard.
Right. Everybody should go to their state Department of Instruction, and you'll be able to find, I don't know if it's going to be as stupid, like obvious as Virginia's is, but you will be able to see the changes from the Code of Virginia. And in the last 2 years, the changes that they have made to like what is even allowable under social work, the terminology and what is allowed and the hours of what you have to get to actually like, because to actually go into schools as a social worker, you have to have 6 credit hours. That's 2 classes in college, like 2 college level classes to go in and to shift from being a social worker to a social worker in school. That's 2 classes of what? And they give you like 15 to choose from. There's no alignment. And the first thing is that like psychiatrists, they can never be in a dual role. That's always been like, even going to therapy, it was always like they can never, that's always like your one role. So how are we going to say that teachers can then teach and do this if the one ethic that I think any psychologist could agree on these days is that you can't ever have dual roles? Like,
right. And this is, in case people were wondering how they define, this is infants.
Yep.
1 month old to 18 months of age.
Deborah.
This is their protective factors definition. So in other words, the factors that they are saying protect the child against, you know, mental illness, like as if they know all the predictive and forecasting for mental illness. Okay. And they have things like initiative, attachment, and relationships for a 1 month old. And is it any wonder that we have people now sit with a straight face saying that a 3-month-old baby is racist? A 3-month-old baby can be racist because their eyes are, you know, fixating differently or focusing at a different rate on the race of their caregiver and not on the race of somebody else. If it's a different race, so that makes them a racist baby.
Listen, 11 years ago, I was at the playground and I had a mom tell me that if my child walked up the slide backwards or up, you know, how we all if they walk up the slide, that they're going to be a serial killer. And that's what this reminds me of, is like thinking like, where do you even get that from? And who would even, that's what I'm like.
I taught my girls very early that they didn't have to share if they didn't want to, that they did not have to share on demand. I tell them that it's nice to share if you want to, and if you want to make friends and play with others, but you're not obligated to. That just because you have a bucket and a shovel, whatever, in the sandbox does not obligate you to share your bucket with people who don't have a bucket. And so they took me at my word, and we go, or same thing with being on a swing. If you're on the swing and you waited your turn, you get to use your turn, and somebody coming up and going, get off, I want a turn, is not a reason that you have to get off. And I had mothers tell me similar things, that I was raising my child to be, an evil little narcissist and a terrible, selfish brat and because my kid wouldn't meet the demands of their kid. And I'm thinking to myself, like, so you stay on that slide, or you stay on that swing longer, honey. I mean, this is who's the bully here? Who's raising the little narcissist? But that's whether they imitate the actions of others, whether they act happy. What is act happy? I would have failed. I would have just been like,
why would you have act and happy? Like, happy is not acting. Like that.
I think this is important. Right. And I think you bring up an important point, Deb, is that all of this stuff is about raising kids who care more about the collective and what everybody else wants than caring about their own individual needs, because they have to raise these global citizens, right, that care about the environment and care about everything else except their own agency.
Yep, exactly. I mean, there are whole websites, like here's one that you guys can go to that Anne found, and I'll put this link. Let me go back to the beginning, but this is, it looks so cute, doesn't it? Enhancing social and emotional development. This is from Kaplan Co., but it's all
Comic Sans font.
I don't know what the heck that is, but look at this. So it's like, oh, thank you for your interest, right? So you scroll through all this junk and look, they genuinely think you're going to believe this. This is literally like, look, we found the snake oil that prevents all the things. Risk and protective factors, environmental, familial within the child, and then risk factors and protective factors, negative vulnerability, positive resilience, outcome. They would have you believe, because they made a cool little graphic, that they actually know what is predictive or, of someone having a mental illness. Now, we have statistical models, right? We have statistical models that tell us what, in terms of outcomes, we can look at the outcomes, we can disaggregate outcomes and say, that's interesting. There seems to be a high correlation between growing up within a nuclear family with a mom and a dad, and the parents were pretty much gainfully employed continuously, and they didn't get divorced, and nobody died prematurely. Like those kinds of things tend to highly correlate with children who are, more successful than not academically, socially, et cetera, et cetera. Correlation is not causation. Mm-hmm. However, this is like 101 of statistics. And yet they're going to tell you when the kid is a month old, there's a risk factor that is negatively correlated with, whatever. We got to get on top of that. No, I'm sorry. You can't control everything. And when you try, you very, very, very often, you very often create new problems.
Yeah.
And they're doing this all the way down. They're obsessed with forecasting and data modeling, and things are more likely to create new problems and new mental illness in our children. And just look at the data. They've been doing this. Lisa, how long have they been doing SEL in America?
A really long time. I mean, this stuff that I've been researching goes all the way back to John Dewey. I mean, and he really believed in education as a way to, and using the means of education as a means of manipulating the child. So really social behaviorism, because he really believed that society was messed up and that collectivism or communism was the cure to society's ills.
Right. But formally, in terms of CASEL, we know that CASEL officially changed to being a social justice change agent in 2017. They changed their model, but they've always been focused on sort of a collective, let's all be nice to each other thing. And that goes back since their founding. So let's say for the sake of discussion, 35, 40 years. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let's just say,
yes,
the more computerized this has gotten, the more they can gather more data, the more they spend more time doing this. Has it improved mental health? Are our teenagers happier, better adjusted, more mature, more successful in school, better at relating to others? I think we all know the answer is no. And instead of stepping back and saying, maybe, just maybe, there's a correlation. They've been so busy finding correlations with every other thing, but mysteriously, they are absent from the data points that they're considering as a risk factor. It's so fascinating to me. We never see them as a risk factor.
They completely ignore the fact that the rise in technology and our students constantly being on media is a huge contributor to their lack of mental health.
Yeah. Right. No, we're going to use more. Let's fill in some more bubbles. Let's sit them in front of more.
Let's make another app
lessons.
Let's make an app.
Let's make a dojo and a this and a that. Yeah. And wonder why our kids are completely dysphoric and disconnected from their bodies and their own minds and are basically looking to the outside world to tell them how they feel. Well, I don't know. What's the right answer? Just tell me what to feel so I can stop filling out these forms, so I can stop being in need of further instruction.
Yeah.
Pretty please. Because if you think the kid who gets told, you need to have some more second step lessons, or you need to have, while they know for a fact that their friends are not getting these lessons, if you think that kid feels better about him or herself, you think that's helping their resilience, you are on crack.
Yeah. Carly was ecstatic that she said, Mom, did you opt me out of the SOLs? And this was like the first time. I mean, people have been telling me for years, and I was like, well, why is it bad? Because I've only been doing this since like I'm hot in it. And she was like, thank you. Like, and she's a test is not a thing to her, but that's how stressed they make these kids about the SOLs. But
look at the circle. They never stop collecting.
No, because
they never stop doing it. Look, we're just going to go in a circle forever and ever and ever. And your child is going to just keep trying to figure out what, and that's by design, you guys. You understand that is like by design. Do you think that 2 + 2 = 5 yet? Oh, well, I guess we're going to have to do this again.
It's torture. Can you imagine sitting there as an adult and like you're getting your toenails pulled out, and you cannot have your toenails from being pulled out until you admit that 2 + 2 = 5?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point, actually, because we talked about this yesterday when we were meeting to prep for this. We as adults look at this whole, like, let's sit down first and talk about how you feel today. I mean, if we had to go to work and start our day that way, and if we had bosses or coworkers or managers that were constantly asking us to fill out, just the depression inventory, just your basic depression inventory or anxiety inventory. If we had to fill that out more than once ever at work, how invasive would we feel? Like that they were being? How much trust would we have in the adults who are trying to teach us things? How much would we feel uncomfortable around our peers if we had to sit with our coworkers and openly share? And these are people we've chosen to be with. We choose where we work, and we can choose to leave. Our kids are held captive. Mm-hmm. If there's one thing a child knows to the depth of their soul and the inside their bones, is that they're a prisoner in that building until the bell rings, and then even the next day. They know they're effectively prisoners. They cannot even go to the bathroom without permission. So that does something to your mindset already. I don't care who you are. When you do not have the option to just get up and say, I'm out of here, I can't take it anymore, that puts you in a hierarchical position that will change every other reaction you have. And I just want parents to try to get in that headspace. Try to go back in time to when you were a little kid and what that felt like. And unless you were the most popular kid in school and you were successful at everything, get deeply in touch with that level of discomfort and now add this.
Yeah. We have a middle school here. Bobby, if you're still on, what was it? Once every period, like class period, you could go to the bathroom. Like, what if you're like, that was like, it's like literally a rule at this middle school not far from here. He played me out his son. And I was like, we have high schools where you have to punch in your student number. Like,
yeah, It's a mess. It's so intrusive. So what I want to do now to wrap it up is, because I think we've done a pretty good intro to all of this as far as show and tell of what these things are, how they're subjective, how they're controversial, etc. Now, can you guys explain to the audience what steps what rights do they have? What rights don't they have to see the data, get the data, opt out of all of this, prevent the data from being further collected? Like, what can they do? Obviously, my preference is everybody leave. Yes. Everybody knows that about me. This is my t-shirt. Okay. But if you're not ready to do that yet, what can they do?
Well, I think at the beginning of the year, they should all know that they have rights to opt out, for instance. Most of your states have particular questions that if they ask your kid about A, B, C, and D, then they need to it has to be an opt-in, not an opt-out, which means they have to get your permission ahead of time to even give the assessment. And then there's certain questions that they ask them that kind of fall into the opt-out category. Regardless, when you get your packet at the beginning of the year of all these forms and stuff you're supposed to sign, somehow slipped in there is a permission form. So you need to look for that. And sometimes it also falls under counseling. So it doesn't always say social emotional learning on it. It's like, can the counselor talk to your kid about race and all these different things? So just know where your opt-outs are and your opt-ins are, and also know the law in your state. Even after those forms go in, you can always get the form on your district website and opt your kid out of those assessments. And then follow up, because let me tell you, there's been so many instances in our state of parents that have come to me and said, I opted my kid out. Their kid calls them from the bathroom saying, Mom, they're trying to give me an assessment right now. What do I do? So
it's in every curriculum, like a survey in one form or the other. Like you can opt, yes, technically remove them from the curriculum of second step, but that didn't stop my daughter's English teacher from asking her 8 questions about her emotions that was getting logged on the giver, for example. So you have to, filling out the form, yes, that, we can tell you how, but God, don't trust anybody that it's going to get done, but,
No, and prep your students for what to do. If, hey, listen, if they ask you about this, 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 and this, you go right to the office and call me.
But understand that if your child, sorry, go ahead.
Besides the written assessments, digital ones, there are often assessments given in class where the kids have to vote with their bodies and things like that. And so just, prep your student to know what to watch out for.
And remember, too, that many of these schools, as Anne pointed out, up until 8th grade, the teacher's doing it for them. The teacher is assessing the kid. The teacher is going, I saw this and I saw that and I did this and that. They'd use Class Dojo. That gets logged forever and always. So first of all, if they ask you to use Class Dojo and they say they're going to use Class Dojo for your kids, say no. Immediately say no. Say, I'm not going to be using it. And I do not want you signing my child up in the Class Dojo class. Do not, because you don't even want them adding info, whether if you're not going to be looking at it anyway, you don't want them adding info. So make sure you don't do that. Anything that is passive where the teacher is documenting things about your kid, make sure you make it unequivocal. There's
another program called Hero K-12 that people need to watch out for. And it's the teachers were encouraging the students to download it to their phones. And
I'm sure they were.
Really cool.
Don't let your kids download any apps to communicate with their teachers or communicate with the school. Don't you do it either. And just make it very, very clear that you don't want anything passive done either. If your kid is in preschool and they try to, have you fill out a questionnaire about your kid, don't do it. Now, how do they go about getting a hold of all the data that's been collected about their kids so far?
It should be up now, but on the Virginians for Children First, I did a student data privacy, and it explains what student data is. It goes into detail. This took me 2 weeks longer than I thought it would. But under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, the parts that Obama did not obliterate, there's a letter. It's already, you just can copy and paste it and put in your pertinent information. But it's under the law still, he's limited a lot, but you can request, hold on, where is it? There's a form letter for FERPA. Same thing with PPRA, Protection of People Rights Amendment, is one I learned quickly that it speaks, and it has not been hijacked by anyone yet.
Except there's no enforcement. You, the parents, are the enforcement, and you can report all day. And all it's going to do, parents, is start a paper trail in case you have to sue someday. The government's not going to do any, just know that. Just know when you fill out the form and you send it in, don't expect a response because it's not going to be forthcoming. They just don't even care. It's like an IDEA.
I just called my daughter's principal and I said, I want this, and I'm just that mom that finally they gave me enough to shut me up, but I'm still going after his bar license because the attorney is the school board attorney that told me no. And then all those OCR complaints. I mean, it's exhausting, but
don't take no for an answer.
It starts to affect people's lives and their livelihoods, and that's you have to figure it out. But and then under COPA, there's this packet also has now this is the one that's 13 and under but we need to stay on top of it's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It was started in 1998 when and it hasn't been touched since, which is why it's still under 13. But you can go in and you can request every piece of you write the school and you make the school accountable that now they have to then go and request it from the provider, and your school probably has about 16 to 30 depending on how many apps they have. But it's Lexia. The amount of in the last 10 years, especially, but then they have to go and they have 45 days to do it. And if your child, because we know that the data is still there, so don't let them tell you it's gone. They can at least tell you what was there. If say your kid's over, we're trying to change the age, but you can find out because it's still there. What was there. Okay. And then there's, we made a pre-opt out. Like I'm going to go ahead and notify you because this law states it that since you're not notifying me that I can opt out. I wrote up a pre-opt out because we know that under this law, if they're under the age of 13, that they can be, you're not offering it. So just because you're not offering it or you're hiding it, here, I went ahead and I made one up for you. So everybody's
still going to have to follow up. You're still
absolutely.
Right. Well, and that's another thing that parents can do, Deb, is, I was able to work with, we weren't able to stop the law that made the Panorama funding permanent after the pilot program. But what we did was we helped write some amendments in there with kind of teeth that said, hey, listen, you need to make sure that parents know that they can opt out of this. A lot of times they'll just send a letter saying, guess what, we're going to do an SEL assessment, by the way. But they don't say, hey, parents, you can opt out of this. They also have to let the parents know at least once a year what kind of data they're collecting so that it's not just academics. I think a lot of parents don't understand what kind of data is being collected, and that they have to tell them what it's being used for.
Right. So it's really, I think I want everybody watching to understand that we know this is a lot of information that we've just thrown at you, and it's probably pretty concerning and you might be overwhelmed, but just take a little time and think about, as I said at the outset, where does your parental role end and the teaching role begin? And are they doing something that you consider to be their proper job? And if they're not, stop them from doing it. Now, we are going to talk about in the next show, we're going to talk about the funding. We're going to talk about the money behind this and the connections between the people who are providing the money for the development of these things and making the money from the selling of these things, because the money that buys it, guess what, is your tax dollars. The money that funds it, the money that goes into the development, the research that, well, there's no research. It's more like research into how big a sucker y'all are meaning school districts, to buy it, or boards of ed or whatever. That's the research they're doing. It's market research on how to package it, how to put the words together to fool you into thinking it's beneficial. And that the people funding that are for-profit philanthropies. Have you ever heard of such a thing? For-profit philanthropies. But we're going to talk about all of that stuff. And Lisa kind of hinted at it earlier when she talked about Zuckbucks in the next installment, because I really want you guys to understand. Now you understand what it is and why it's a problem. And then we want you to understand how big it is. and who's making bank, because that's going to help you better understand why simply opting out or complaining or electing a new person in your local school board or whatever is probably not going to be enough action on your part to make a difference here. So we're going to talk about that in the next installment. Do you guys have any final comments to say before we sign off?
No,
no, I think we covered it all.
Yeah, I can't thank you guys enough for all the hard work and research. You know, Anne, Lisa, these guys, as they said, they're just moms. They're moms using their own time, their own energy, their own money, everything to just dive in and get up to their eyeballs in stuff that, as you can see, is pretty upsetting. When you read this stuff all day, every day, yeah, you get really upset because you understand it because you've been spending all your time reading it, and you just want to go and take all the moms and all the dads and just say, stop, you know, like they're hurting your kids, and it's not easy. So thank you for coming to this show. Thank you for sharing this broadcast with others. And please follow Lisa on her platforms, follow Anne on hers, and, you know, subscribe if you're not already. And we will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.